What I want to know, the first thing, is do Bob and Connie's kids call you Mama and Grandpa instead of Grandma and Grandpa?
No.
They don't? That's only Amy and her brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that come from?
Well, I always thought that perhaps my mother, we called her Mimi.
Uh-huh.
And Beverly gave her that name. And I think it came from Mama, probably, because I always called my mother Mama. And I think that Bev named her Mimi, and the kids called her Mimi. And then when Paul and Amy came along, when they started talking, I guess they changed the Mimi to Ma. I don't know, from grandmother or what. But anyway, they started calling me Mama and him Bampo for some reason or other.
Huh. But your other grandkids don't do it, huh?
Well,
No.
they called you that too.
No, we don't see them very often, and they just call me Grandma Francis. In fact, Jeff writes to us, Dear Francis and Bob.
Is that right?
About once every 3 or 4 months. And the kids call us that, but most of the time it's Grandma Francis or Grandma Bob. I think it's nice for them to make their own pet names, but I guess that's what Connie and Bob must have taught them. That girl's hungry, Mama. Don't you ever feed her?
Never.
Which one of those glasses are mine? Any of them?
They're both empty. I don't
That
think
one
it
I
matters.
just put out there. That's the
That
milk
was my
glass.
stuff.
Well, I must have left mine in the kitchen.
I'll go get it.
Okay.
The poor, one, lonely cookie.
Yeah, there's some more
Amy's
out there.
been watching it though, right
Well, there's some
along.
more out there, honey.
I've had
Of those?
There we
Yeah.
go.
You know, looking way back, my first school that I went to that I remember, and don't remember too much of that because I only went to kindergarten, and we had a little play, and I was Miss Muffet that sat on the tuffets, and there was a boy that was a spider, and I'm not sure that it wasn't Grandpa.
Not me.
Well, you were in Miss Todd's class, and so was I.
Not me.
You were never a spider, huh?
Never a spider.
Well, I remember she wore a black apron, and they put her black apron over his back, and he crawled around the desk and frightened Miss Muffet off the tuffets, And then I remember some naughty little boy, 1 or 2 of them chased me home, and after I met Bob and we got to talking, we found out we'd both gone to the same grade school. Of course, he graduated from there, and I didn't.
Garfield, for your
Garfield
information,
School.
isn't much.
And I think maybe he's one of the boys that chased me home, too.
Oh, where's Garfield?
You have a funny memory.
Is that
My mother always told
I
her.
didn't even know her then.
Well, honey,
Steve.
you were
all the
good.
good-looking girls were chasing me in
It
those
wasn't
days.
these girls that were good-looking or bad-looking. It was just naughty boys chasing nice little girls.
Now, where's Garfield Elementary School? Is that in Kansas City?
It doesn't
They
exist
tore it
anymore.
down
They
here
tore
a
it
few
down.
years ago.
I have a brick downstairs, and on the desk was one of the bricks out of the Garfield school.
Is that the one Mom taught at?
And the
No, that was
she didn't
Franklin,
teach
huh?
it. That's where she was born.
But where was it? It was here in Kansas City?
Oh, yeah, it was out
Kansas
northeast.
City. It was on Wabash Avenue,
I don't even
about
remember.
6th Street.
Huh. So you were both born and raised in Kansas City?
Oh, yes,
Right.
My mother was born and raised in Kansas City.
I was born on Sunday,
Really?
right at home.
Huh. Did your folks ever tell you anything about what it was like when you were born? What they were doing, or the conditions of the times, or how?
No, only Dad had to go to work about 4 o'clock in the morning because he had to be there at 5 o'clock. And he had to get up and go get the doctor on Sunday, which was his only day of rest. And he probably hoped I'd never been born. He wasn't a very big man, Steve, but for his size and his stature, he was as strong as a bull. And he had only, I think it was 14 days education in his entire lifetime. And yet when he owned the poultry store, many years later, of course, he had all the boys working down there and the cousins from Platte City and too many relatives. Only about 4 or 5 of the employees down there were other than relatives. And I've seen and heard Dad many times when he's putting up an order of chicken, he put up 6 orders to one of anybody else's. And if hens were 79 cents a pound or 39 cents a pound, whatever it might have been in those days, he'd say 472 pounds of fat hens, 39 cents a pound, and he'd multiply that in his head just like you were talking. He was just like a machine. And Herb say, well, I'll figure it out, Dad. You don't need to figure it. It's right. And it was right, too.
Now, Herb was your brother?
Herb was the oldest brother.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
Well, I don't have any now. I have one brother still alive. That's Bill. He's 2.5 years older than I. And then Herbert was the oldest boy. And James was the youngest. And Mildred was the oldest child. And to hear her talk, she reared all of us children, which was a lot of malarkey. But she took credit for everything she could and then some too. But Father lost his poultry business right after World War I, when things went so bad, all because they extended too much credit to people. I remember, and it doesn't exist now, and it hasn't for many years, at 12th and Main Street, there was a Arbor cafeteria down below the main floor. And when they went bankrupt, I know they owed Father $27,000, and he lost all that. And then there was a Chinese restaurant on 12th Street in McGee on the 2nd floor, and when they went bankrupt, they lost $18,000, which he didn't get back.
Now, was this immediately after the First World War, or was that
After
during
World
the
War
Depression?
I. After World War I. And it wasn't a question of the business not making money. It was a question that they just gave the money away in credit. So you used to supply grocery stores, and those grocery stores would come down there, and they'd be ready to pick up their chickens at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. So they'd be back ready for the store to open. And they had, maybe 25 or 30 of those grocery stores went bankrupt, and they owed Dad as much as $10,000 and $12,000 apiece, all of which he didn't get. And then they built the President Hotel at 14th and Baltimore, and all he sold them was poultry and eggs. That's all. And he gave them an open line of credit, and they took him for $22,000 when they went bankrupt. So it was a combination of the losses that they had and the inability of Herb and Brother Bill, who was supposed to do the collecting. Mother didn't poke her nose into the business in any direction. And of course my sister didn't either, as far as that goes. But it's just a shame that he lost that business. And I recall when Father had to take bankruptcy, he had a truck, a 1.5-ton truck, made by Graham Brothers, but Dodge had just bought out the Graham Brothers truck about 6 months before, and that's why it was named the Graham Brothers truck. And I know Dad paid back in those days about $3,100 for that truck, and it went at auction for $700, and he'd had it less than a year.
Huh.
And I stood there and watched him with big tears in his eyes as his business was sold to liquidate the creditors. In other words, he just had a bunch of boys that he took into the business, and they always wanted to play.
They built the business up, but they didn't know how to keep it.
The boys didn't build the business, Dad built the
Well, I
business.
know.
How old were you then?
Oh, I expect about 12 years old.
What's the earliest thing you can remember doing with your brothers and sister and parents, with your family? What's your earliest childhood memory with your family?
Oh, I remember when Dad was doing real well in his business, he bought a Hudson Super 6 sedan. And he would take it down to Independence Avenue and Olive Street to a White Rose gasoline station. I haven't heard of him for years, of course. And he'd have the car lubricated and the oil changed to go to Platte City, which is 28 miles away now. In those days, about 33 miles by dirt road.
That was a trip.
We'd leave on Sunday morning after Sunday school, and we'd go up and have dinner with Dad's sisters, Aunt Georgie Bryan, and Totate, that was another, Aunt Dodie we called her. He had 12 sisters, and he was the 13th child and the only boy.
Oh, my.
And the last of the family, too, as far as that's concerned. And they all lived in this little town of Tracy, which is a half mile north of Platte City, Missouri, for the most part.
Now, what's his first name, your dad?
William.
William. That's
But he went by Bud, right?
Bud.
My mother called him Bud, and where he got that, his sisters all called him Buddy.
Oh, I see.
And then when he went, he and Mother fell in love, and he was courting Mother, and her folks had passed away, and she lived with Bud and Lucy Hall, which was her aunt.
Right.
Aunt Lucy was. And Bud Hall at that time owned the Yellow Ranch, which, if you went to North Kansas City and went to Skaggs Drugstore, you looked east as far as you could see, and then turned back north, and as far as you could see up over the hills. All that was owned by Bud Hall. And we used to go over there. As a matter of fact, they'd come and get us in those days when I was just a youngster, because Dad didn't have a car. And the first car that he ever had was a Model T touring car. And he bought it from a fellow named King that went into service. And he had this Model T, and Dad bought it from him. But before that, Uncle Bud and Aunt Lucy come over, and she had on her big hat and a scarf over her face and around over her head, and she had a long white coat on, and he did too, and he had a driving cap, and he drove a Jackson automobile, and that was quite a nice car in those days. And he'd take us over there, and from the Yellow Ranch house out to the barn, they had nothing but horses that they tilled the ground with, and he must have had some place near 100 or slightly over 100, I don't remember exactly. But they fed the horse, they watered the horses in a huge trough. It was about 18 feet long and about 3 feet wide, And of course they pumped water with a windmill into this big trough. And some of the employees would catch catfish and throw them in the trough. And they had some pretty good sized catfish in there. We used to go up and poke sticks at them. And my Uncle Bud Hall used to have a regular crew there that lived on the ranch and looked after the horses, and they had a cooperage. They made their own barrels and everything right there, with the requirement that they had to have a lot of food. So he'd buy sweet pickles. The top of the keg may have been maybe 10 or 12 inches in diameter, and the bottom was about 15 inches in diameter, and it must have been about maybe 1.5 foot or 2 feet deep. That was a keg of sweet pickles, and that's the way he bought them. And of course, William and I, when we went over, used to walk down this big railroad tie walk. They had 2 ties laid together and sunk into the ground, and we go down to the warehouse, and we get into that pickle keg. And my Uncle Bud Hall was a dirty mouth old man, and mean as the devil to begin with. And Aunt Lucy, she didn't care what the kids did, you know, because we were just like any other kid into everything. And we'd go in there and put our hand down there and get a handful of sweet pickles. And my Uncle Bud Hall caught us in there one day, and he said, "Get your dirty hands out of that pickle keg." And then he went back in. He said, "Maud, why don't you teach those damn boys of yours some lessons?" He said, "They're out there putting their dirty, filthy hand in the pickle keg and eating pickles as faster than you can take your hand out." And then the people out in the cooperage shop, they got so they liked me real well every time I went over there. And the man that was in charge of that made me a wheelbarrow. And the earliest thing that I ever remember in my lifetime getting that made me real happy was that wheelbarrow painted red. And I remember wheeling that back over the railroad tie walk back to the house, and I was so happy I just tingled all over. And I've got a wooden wheelbarrow in the basement that looked almost like it. But the wheel was made of wood and everything. So those were some happy days, and yet, as I say, Aunt Lucy Hall, she thought a great deal of Mother. And Uncle Bud Hall, of course, he loved Aunt Lucy at that time.
Excuse me.
Bud Hall and Lucy went to France, and he bought her a complete serving set of silverware with genuine pearl handles on them. And when my Aunt Lucy died, Bud Hall married again, and this woman didn't care for the silverware at all, but she had said she had heard Lucy say several times that she wanted Maud Monk to have them. So she called her one day and told her to come and get them. And Mother thought that was something, really. And it was something, because they were made in France. And I don't know whether it was Paris or where, but anyway.
You okay?
Colton,
You don't
excuse
need
me,
to choke on that.
it's on the water, not the silverware. Is it going to be a good...
So when my mother passed away, my sister came here from down in Chattanooga, and all the beautiful bric-a-brac and what was the other stuff she had? Well, they're all little vases and things, antiques. She took everything that she could get, plus that silverware. We don't know whatever happened to it.
Well, I know where Mary's monk has it.
Oh, that's right. Now, thank you for reminding me. When my sister took that, she went back to California, where she and her son were living out there, and she passed away. And then when my son Bob, nephew Bob Jeffries passed away, why my brother was named receiver of the estate, and Mary Monk, his wife, and he went out there, and that's what happened to the silverware. They scavenged everything that they could get.
You know, I've heard Mom say that she has some pearl-handled knives.
Well, you
that
see,
Grandmother
Mary
Monk
used to say that she'd heard the grandmother Monk
Say
said that
she
belonged to
wanted Beverly
Bev.
to have it.
Belonged to Bev.
And that Mary Monk,
Now be
she
careful,
was
you're
my
talking on
brother's.
the-
She was my brother's wife, but she was one of the most selfish human beings in the world. Everything for herself, and
Is that Herb's wife?
Herb's wife, right? And how the split came between Herb's wife and myself. They tried to sell the lots over here at the cemetery where Mother and Dad are buried in order to get money for him to stay out there instead of spending their part of the money. They didn't want to spend it, you know. They wanted to sell the cemetery lots. And I went over there one day just to see why they hadn't taken care of the cemetery lots, and found that she gotten Dad to sign over the lots to her, and it wasn't a transfer of title. It was just authority to say who was going to be buried there. And the only difference was that when I was in California, I talked to Dad, and he said, "Bob, you're the only boy left in Kansas City, the only one there, and you look after things, and I want you to look after those cemetery lots." Lucy Hall and Bud Hall gave those to Mother and Dad for our family. And he said, any monk that wants to be buried there is fine. It's up to you, Maud, and you, Bud, to decide who will say who's going to be buried there when you're gone. Well, Father gave me the deed to the lot. And when he did, I went to the cemetery and I showed them the deed, and I said, let me tell you something. If you or anybody else, I don't care who, ever tries to dispose of those lots, I'll spend every nickel that I have in this world to sue you, and whoever tries to take them away. Those belong to the Monk family. And as long as they're there, if there's a monk that needs to be buried, there's a place for him to be buried. And they immediately changed it over, and so that nobody could do anything about it. Of course, my sister passed away, and then my nephew passed away, so that didn't leave anybody with the authority on the cemetery lots with me. But when I started to say something to Herbert about the lots, he and Mildred getting together and wanting to sell the cemetery lots to get a few dollars to keep Dad out there in the home that he went to after she encouraged him to go to the West Coast and live with them, and he couldn't do that. He tried to live with Bill, and he couldn't live with them because they'd get up early in the morning and they were up late at night, and Dad would go to bed early and want to get up early, you know. But he couldn't live with them, so he just got a place over there. And they took his Social Security and money and got a home out there, which was revamped from a tourist court. I visited it before he passed away, thank goodness. And anyway, when I started to talk to Herbert about it, when Mary piped up, she said, I don't think that's any of your business. I said, Mary, let me tell you something. My name is Monk, and your husband's name is Monk, and you're a monk by marriage, not by blood. And when I'm talking to my brother, you keep your nose out of this. Any other subject, you're welcome to say whatever you please. But as it applies to those cemetery lots, they belong to the monk family, and they're going to continue to belong to the monk family, and nobody's going to sell them, and I promise you I'll make sure that they don't. And they didn't, and they haven't been, and they won't, because I've got it set now with a cemetery, so as long as there is a monk alive, or a relative of a monk, if they need a place to be buried, there is a place to be buried. So you see, I'm a little fighter from back a few years too. But I've always believed in fair play and honesty. And as far as I know, Francis and I never cheated anybody out of anything. We've never taken anything that didn't belong to us. We've given many times to many people to help them out when they got in a tight spot. We never expected anything in return. And even all the years I was in business, Steve, I could have had gratuities, I could have had special favors, but I didn't take any special favors from anybody. And that's why, when you say Bob Monk, people have known me from Francis, signed Frankie.
That's what you called me before we were married afterwards for a long time.
And there was a Valentine card, and it had marbles in there, and I still have it. Let's play for keeps. So that's the way she got me trapped.
She won you in a marble game.
Huh? Won me in a marble game for keeps. So good or bad, there it is.
Yeah. Well, ma'am, I'll tell us a little bit about your family. How many brothers and sisters did you
I
have?
just had one sister, a baby sister, and I don't even remember her, Steve. She died when she
You guys young, huh?
baby, and
What was
I was
her
about
name?
18 months older. Virginia Ann, and that's all. I don't ever remember at all, because I was just 18 months older than she was.
Well,
But I remember Mama talking about sister. I always called her sister, but...
Tell us about some of the things you remembered doing with your family, some of your earliest memories.
Oh, I remember Christmas time and holidays when I had an uncle that was my dad's brother, and an aunt that was my dad's older sister, and we would share holidays, and maybe one would be, usually it was our house Thanksgiving. And my aunt she had two girls and one boy. But she really had three girls, but they lost one when she was 8 years old. But we always had Christmas in her house because she had the biggest family. And a lot of times we'd go out there and stay Christmas Eve and stay all night.
Where did they live?
They lived in Kansas City too, Missouri. That makes quite an impression on children. And by the way, we had Christmas trees out there, but they had candles on it. And Christmas Day Eve, or Christmas Day, the night of Christmas Day, we'd all gather around the tree, and the parents would light the candles, and then we'd stand around and admire the pretty trees. But the way trees burn so easily, I often wonder, with that many kids standing around, somebody playing with toys, why it didn't catch on fire sometimes. Because one time Bob put a Christmas tree in part of the Christmas tree in our fireplace when we lived on Paseo. My gosh, more fire came out the front and went up the chimney. They just go like oil, just grab the fire. And I often think back about the little kids. And of course, we did that till I guess we were about 10 or 12 years old.
Tell us some more about holidays. Were they a big occasion in your family?
Well, usually because we spent them with them. I mean, I was the only child as far as, and my aunt I just had one cousin by him. He lives in California now. and I have two girl cousins that live in California now. And I hear from them at Christmas time. They write a nice long letter. But, we didn't only we'd have turkey, or we'd have chicken, or we'd have goose at Christmas time. It wasn't any one particular, like always turkey, it seems like now in the holidays. And I remember one Thanksgiving, Mama had the whole family over, and it snowed. It just snowed something terrible. And they came by streetcar, and they had to walk about a block and a half, and they never got up to our house. And Mama borrowed a great big platter from the people next door, and coming back, she fell down and broke it. Oh, she felt so badly, but she was at that time able to replace it, even though they'd had it a number of years. But then I remember birthday parties, and I remember one I must have been about, I wasn't such a child then, maybe 14 or 15 years old, and Mama made me a cake, and some of the kids hid it from me, and oh golly, how upset I was, because they brought the cake back in. And then I always had a lot of nice clothes, because Mama sold so nicely for me too, you know. And I still have a doll or two that I had when I was a little kid. I have them yet. And then I never will forget one Christmas. I was pretty small, and I had a baby doll. And it went to sleep, and it had little tiny short hair like a little baby. I wish I had it now. And it had a box of the most beautiful clothes with it. And later on, Mama told me they belonged to my cousin. My aunt had saved this baby clothes, and they gave them to me for this baby doll for Christmas. So that I was thrilled to death with these beautiful clothes, because my aunt did lovely embroidery at that time.
Did you have any pets when you were?
Any what?
Pets.
Oh, I always had a dog. Oh, yes.
Do you remember any of their names?
Oh, I had Rags and Cupid. Oh, Cupid is the one I remember first. I checked. I have some pictures of her. And she was a little, what are those little tiny, not a fox terrier, because she had long hair.
Spit.
Little Spits, yes. You don't even hear them now, do you? Cutest little dogs that look like a little fox almost.
He could spit left or right and never blink an eye.
But she was white with little brown spots. But I have a picture of her sitting in a rocking chair, and she's sitting up beside me. And then another thing I remember before I ever went to school. Papa thought he ought to go out, and he needed the fresh air. My aunt, I think, thought it more than he did. And we'd go out in summer and camp. And we thought we were going clear to heck and back, and it's just over here to Dodson now. But we'd go and transfer on streetcars to get out there. Then Papa got a truck. He was going into the used furniture business or something, so they bought a brand new truck. And I remember only one thing I remember about that truck. We started home from Dodson one day in that truck, and it had rained and rained and rained, and it was mud, I'll bet 6 inches deep, and we slid every place but upside down out of that truck.
I remember her dad had a Dork passenger car, and it had a spotlight on it that you could raise up and down, or turn around, or clear down, or turn to the back. And he gave that to me one day. And I said, Ollie, no, I don't want to take that. You had that so many years. No, I want you to take it. And I did, and it's downstairs in the basement.
Huh.
The only change I ever made in it was to put a double socket with a 12-volt bulb in it. And I know I had a battery downstairs, and one night the lights went out, and I wanted to go down there and work on them. So I just went down, hooked a couple of clamps on that battery, and turned that light on. I could shoot it all over the basement.
Wow.
With her dad kept things for years and years. As a matter of fact, he saved those dime magazines. And you know that when he passed away, and of course then Mimi later, we went over and got those magazines out of the basement, and there must be 700-800 of them. And I know some of them he paid $1 a piece for. Back in the days when they were first printed, they were 10 cents each.
10 cents each.
That's why they call it a dime. Call them a dime magazine. And he's got some originals down there. Some of them are in good shape, and others are just brown with age. And they just fall apart when you touch them, but the others are real good. And then he saved a bunch of these Western cowboy stories, and I've got those downstairs in a box too. As a matter of fact, some fellow advertised that he wanted to buy those magazines, and he came over here. I think they cost 15 cents a piece and a quarter, and he gave Francis, I think, it was $5 a piece for most of them, and $6 for two or three.
Should have waited and see how much they really cost. Somebody just offered.
Well, he was a book dealer and buying them to resell to somebody else. So it's like everybody else. They take advantage of the situation. I tell you this, we went out to the ball game last night, and I had 2 extra tickets. I didn't know what to do with them. So I said, Francis, I'll try to sell them to somebody, and if I can't, I'll give them to them. So it didn't cost me anything anyhow. The bank gave them to me. And as we were driving in, some fellow said, anybody want to sell some tickets? Anybody want to sell some tickets? And I said, yeah, I've got a couple I'll sell you. He said, I'd give you $8 for them. Well, I'd forgotten that they were $5 tickets or $10 worth. But after all, $8 was $8, and I didn't want to fool around trying to sell them. It was too hot. So I sold him for $8, and after we got in,
Mexican... I got a couple of kids down here I want to give them to.
He said, I want to get them in, is the way he said. He didn't want to give them to them. Anyway, when they got in and sat down, I said, oh, you're the fellows that bought our extra tickets. Well, I said, yeah, we got them from a fellow down here. He said he got them for us. And I said, well,
he said, would you mind telling
me? He said, would you mind telling me how much you sold them for? I said, $4 a piece. Or $8. He said, well, we paid $16 for them.
Oh, my God.
Because the windows were closed and they weren't selling any more tickets to get in over there.
No.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever gone out there and they've been that way. They were just begging for tickets.
Was it sold out?
Yeah.
Sold out. They
Yeah, it was sold out last night.
People were walking away and all the ticket exchanges.
And yet there were 3 seats in front of us that weren't filled.
Probably some bank or something.
Somebody had given them away to somebody, or they couldn't use them for some reason, just like the 2 we couldn't use. But if I told this Mexican, I said, I'm sorry that we didn't know you needed them. I'd rather give them to you than sell them to him for $8 than have him make a big deal. But he didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with it. He wanted to see the ball game. They did. They saw a loser.
Yeah. So that's right.
So that's life.
Well, tell me, you never miss a ball game, and you like sports and things. When you were young, did you used to play ball a lot?
Only basketball.
Oh.
When I went to high school, I had no interest in anything, and there was a coach by the name of Reeves Peters. And Northeast High School, and I wasn't making very good grades, and M's was about all I was making, and they weren't M pluses either. Might have been an M minus or two in there, but I was interested in ROTC, and I did that mainly because I get my clothes. And the folks didn't have too much money to send me to school anyhow, so I'd ride the streetcar one way for a nickel, and then I'd come home for a nickel. I got a dime a day to ride the streetcar. So instead of riding the streetcar, I walked, and because I walked, several other people walked with me, and they'd walk home, and then I'd take the 10 cents and I'd buy a big carton of milk and a sandwich. You had to get your sandwich one place and your milk at another.
At the school, you mean?
At Northeast High School. Right. And I'd go out and get my sandwich and put it on the table, and the smart alecks, while I went after the milk, would come over and each one would grab the sandwich and eat a big bite out of it. And they did that until I whomped 2 or 3 of them real good. Because by that time I'd learned to use my fists. And then they didn't bother my sandwich anymore. And then just to make sure they didn't, and you can pass this on to your youngsters if they get into that similar situation, I'd get the sandwich and spit all over it, see, so they could see me, and then they wouldn't take bites out of it. And I put my milk down, I'd spit in the milk so they wouldn't take that either. So if you don't think this was a smart old man even as a kid, I'll put in with you. But back to the athletics, Mother got after me because she said, Bob, you're a much smarter boy than that. And she said, you can't go to school all day and study in the study hall and then come home and go over to the concourse and drill over there at night till 9 o'clock, and then we had to walk, of course, no transportation, unless you ride a streetcar over there, and I wasn't about to do that. I didn't have any money. But that's when I won the 7th Corps Area Trophy for military efficiency, because we'd go over there and I had this platoon. I was a lieutenant at that time, and we'd drill under the lights for 3 hours from about 6 o'clock until 9 o'clock. And the whole platoon was there. They were a fine bunch of young men. As a matter of fact, I was trying to think of the fellow's name that was head of the big soap company that hired Bob Hope for
Luckman.
Charlie Luckman. He's the only black mark that I got at the 7th Corps Area inspection. The commanding general came up and he came to present arms. And the general said, your name, Private? Said, Private Charles Luckman. He says, how many men in the squad? 7 men and a corporal, sir. He said, don't you consider the corporal a man? Oh, yes, sir. The correct answer was 8 men, 1 a corporal, and the only and the smartest man. He made millions of dollars.
Yeah, he's president of Palmolive
Pete. And he selected Bob Hope and gave him a 10-year contract for several $1 million a year. And yet the smartest man in the bunch was the dumbest ox of all, and the only black mark I had against me. In the platoon drill, the cadence, everything was in perfect order. The rifle drill, I even won the saber drill.
What's that?
Sword.
Oh.
Mount, up, down, salute, down, pass and review.
Swords, Amy, swords.
War, W-A-R. Trained to be a soldier. And I still have the big trophy that I won down the basement. And that was a combination of a military efficiency and a contest they had. And the sergeant in charge of the military out there wanted another chap to win that. And they thought they had it won. And the thing that tilted the decision in my favor was the sale of some tickets. Of course, I'd always sold tickets all my life, with the result that I won this thing, and then he didn't want to give me the trophy. He said, "I'll give you a medal." And I said, "No, Sergeant, the trophy was the thing that I won with military efficiency, and I won it by a large margin, and then you attached bigger percentages to the ticket sales, and I sold more tickets by far than anybody else, so I won it honestly and fairly, and I want the cup." So he presented the cup to me, and it's in the yearbook when I graduated, that I had won the military trophy, but he wouldn't have it engraved for me. And I went to the principal of school, and the principal said, "Bob, don't you worry, we'll have it engraved for you." And they did. And that's the one that's in the case downstairs.
Oh, I see.
Well, when Ray Peters wanted me to play football, he said, "Bob, you're a natural for football." And I said, "My dad won't let me play football because my grades are not good enough." He said, "It would be all right if I go out and talk to your dad." I said, "I'm sure of that, and also Mother. Of course, Mother, she wants to do most anything that we children want to do that's within reason." So when he asked Mother, she said, "Well, Mr. Peters," she said, "I'd like to see Bob play football if he wants to do that." But she said his dad only had about 14 days education his entire lifetime, and he don't believe in athletes. I played basketball, but I played with the church over at the Independence Avenue Methodist Church. And I was running guard in those days, and running guard didn't shoot. The only shot that I made during the entire season, the year we won the Open Court Championship, was one time from center with the score tied, and I made it and won the game. The only shot I ever made. So Frank Alexander wrote an article about me and said the only guy that shot 1,000 all season. But I could have missed it and been a heel, you know, without passing the ball down. But in those days, they didn't have these great big tall hooks. You'd tip the ball, and when that man went into the air, why, another man would come down the side, or you call running forward, and reach and grab that ball in the air in the jump and throw the ball to the forward, or the running guard would come up, and then you had a stationary guard, which was my job. Well, I got interested in that, and then I learned that you could make money being a referee. So I became a referee.
Now, was this still while you were in high school, or after you graduated?
No, after you got out of high
After I
school.
was out of high school. I made
Did you
about...
play basketball while you were in high school?
No high school basketball, only with the Sunday school class.
I see.
And then after I got out of high school, I used to referee basketball. As a matter of fact, I was still refereeing basketball when I met Frances. And she used to go to the basketball games with me.
And you know, he had the black and white wide striped shirt just like they wear now. You never did get away from that.
As a matter of fact, Steve, the pair of shoes that are down the basement cost me $28.
That'd be equivalent to about 100 now.
I would say. But they have luck. And at that time, you could have the soles replaced. But now the leather's dried out over the years, and I haven't taken care of them like I should. But that's the memory of the days that I used to referee basketball. And Francis will tell you
in those days, I could run like a deer. I'd keep up with them, didn't I, honey?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when I ran that.
You see a lot of companies used to sponsor basketball teams, and they'd have these meets. And that's what Bob refereed in.
That's right. You only had one referee. You didn't have an umpire. You had to work that whole game yourself, and I worked 2 games a night.
You probably ran more than the players did.
Oh, did I? I never will forget, one night I was refereeing a final game, and Francis has heard this many times before, but they had kind of a little bleachers arrangement in this elementary school, pardon me, where people could sit up there and watch the game. And it got to be a pretty rough game, and when it got rough, I'd throw the man off the floor. Well, it was a Hobbs Feed Company and the Western Union that were playing. Now, the Western Union made the first mistake, and I cautioned them. Never threw a man off the floor without cautioning him. He came right back and did the thing wrong, so I threw him off. Well, then Hobbs Feed wanted to get even, so they got rough. And finally, I had all the first team on both the Hobbs and Western Union thrown off the floor. And somebody was eating a candy bar, and they threw that wrapper out on the floor, and they had fans in there to stir up the air. And I blew that paper out on the floor, and I come running down that floor as hard as anybody could run. And this ball went down, and I was trying to follow the ball, and the Western Union boy jumped into the air and grabbed the ball and threw it while I tried to make a reverse to follow the ball back, and I stepped on that candy paper and fell on my hip. And I'll tell you, if I had a place to go and cry, I would have cried. It hurt me so bad. Everybody applauded because they hated me. I was a no good umpire.
Referee, huh?
A referee. And anyway, the Hobbs Feed Company finally won it, and they won it fairly and honestly by the end. But they just got rough and tough, and just like baseball teams, get out there and the whole team battles each other over somebody's individual mistake. So to make a long story short, why, they promised that they were going to take me when I get out the front door, both teams. And Frances said, "Oh, Bob," she says, I'm afraid. I said, "No use to be afraid." So I got out there, there was 7 of them that were standing out there. I said, "Well, Mr. Referee, now it's our turn." I said, "Okay, fellows, you're supposed to be athletes and sportsmen." I said, "I don't know how long I can last, but I think I'm good enough to take you individually and one at a time for all 7 of you. Now, if you're going to be heels and rats like you were out there on the basketball floor, then forget it. Go ahead and do what you have to do. But if you're sportsmen, let's see who's going to be the first guy to take me on. And I'll bet you I can handle him without any trouble. And the next 2 or 3 or 4 right behind him." This one big fellow that played for Hobbs team, he said, "Come on, guys, wait a minute." He said, "The referee's talking sense. We were wrong, he was right. Now he's got guts enough to take us all on one at a time. I say we give him a free bill and pass." They all just turned around and walked away. And that was a relief to Mama Monk here. It wasn't my wife at that time. No. But she sure thought they were going to take me that night. But you see, when I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a prize fighter. And that's way years before I ever met Francis.
About how old were you then?
Oh, I imagine about 9, 10 years old. And my brother-in-law, Jeffrey, rented an apartment across the street from our 205 Olive home, and he set up a ring in the basement, and they put padding on the floors, and then they got authority from the owner of the apartment to drill some holes in the floor to put down the iron posts and concrete, and then they stuck ropes around, just regular professional rope. And I'd been training under a fellow named Joe McGowan. I never fought him, because he was supposed to be a contender for the World Heavyweight Championship, and he had a fight, when he had pneumonia and he got congestion and he died from it. My mother made me quit then. She didn't want me to fight anymore, and I promised her I would. But anyway, my brother Bill used to hit me, and he'd grab my lips and pull them apart like that. Well, they put me in a ring with him, and brother-in-law said, well, Bob, this is one time you've got it, and Bill doesn't have it. He said, take him. So, I don't know, I turned around, and Bill hit me up the side of the head right behind the ear, which was a foul. And boy, I went after him and hit him and knocked him clear over the rope and knocked one of his teeth out. And I mean, he was out cold, and Jeffrey got down there and picked him up. He always stood down there and watched. He was a pretty nice fellow. And yet after this fellow that I trained under McGowan had passed away, of course he was friendly, and we all knew him, everybody in the neighborhood. But he taught me to strike with the weave of my body and never try to come around from the side. Always a stroke from right back at your chest, and then the movement of your body. And he showed me how much power you could get behind that. He hit me, but not hard enough to hurt me. And then he let me hit him. But Brother said, Bob, I've never asked you anything, but I want to ask you this. Please don't follow the fight. The fight doesn't. And I said, okay, I won't, Mother. So I didn't, and maybe that knocked a little sense into my head at that time. But not too much, I don't think. But that's about the source of my athletics until I went out to the Linwood Methodist Church. And they had a gymnasium out there on Linwood Boulevard and Olive Street. That's where I met Francis. And they found out that I was a referee, and they wanted me to start a boys team out there. Well, they didn't have any, there was only 40 people in the class at that time. So I got Pete Martin, who was a fine girls coach, to come over, and he brought a lot of girls over there to class that were basketball players. And then I got a bunch of these fellows like Punk Wingate, that was All-American forward on fifth main team. And we developed the men on the ladies team. But the boys never did any good because they were all prima donnas. I mean, they wouldn't play together. But the girls that Pete brought out there were excellent players, and they had worked together. And would you believe it that they went to Dallas, Texas for the playoff in the entire championship of the entire United States. And two of those girls, one got a wrist broke and the other got an ankle broke in that game. But they were basketball players. Don't think they weren't. And then when we gave a basketball dinner, a victory dinner, why, this thing wore a red dress and attracted my attention.
No, sir.
That's what caught me, was a red dress.
I had the red dress on at a Valentine's party.
Honey, you had it on at that party that night?
I had a tan dress on that
You did
night,
not.
and a cute
We
apron.
can't remember
and
that.
I still have the cute apron.
Anyway, the red dress attracted my attention, so I asked her for a date, and she was trying to get around to get a date with me, too.
Oh, you could see
I
that,
found
sir.
that out, too.
Oh, you could
Because
see
by that
it.
time,
I didn't even know
I
you
was
were
president of the Sunday school class, and would you believe that the last Sunday of the contest that we had in excess of 1,200 people in that Sunday school class?
We had to meet in the church.
Had to meet in the church. We had so many people. But we accomplished that by getting a good man to teach every Sunday, Frank O'Denny, and he came from the old Independence Avenue Methodist Church. And Frank says, Bob, you bring him in and I'll try to keep him. And then we had a trip down to Knoll, Missouri. And I think there's a few snapshots here But Billy Andlar, who owned the Bonaventure Theater, was MGM's cameraman for this area, sent his photographer down on the train, and we paid his way down there, and a place for him to stay, and his way back. And then they showed that for 4 days on a downtown theater, and then for a week out on the theater out at Glenwood and Prospect. The people were so stacked in there, we had to move into the church. But one Sunday we'd have the police band for the music, and the next Sunday we'd have the Malay band, and then we'd have the Masonic Order, the Masons band. And this is the kind of activity we had. We had something going all the time. Hayrack rides and things that interested young people. And then after Francis and I got married, when we came back, after all that effort, they didn't even show me the courtesy to say, well, here's Bob Monk and his new bride, Frances.
They introduced me the week before, though.
Well, they didn't introduce me and you the time we came back from our wedding. Anyhow, I lost interest in the church at that time, and I've never gained it back since.
Oh, honey, you were active in the in this class over here at the church. What are you talking about?
What class?
Why, I made cookies in the shape of footballs, and one time, and we delivered
Oh,
them
that
there
was the
with-
married people's class
Yes,
over there.
that's
That was
over
your
there.
fault. You got me into that.
Well, I don't care whose fault we were.
Sure.
Well, okay, when you saw her in the red dress, tell us about how you got to know her and the things you used to do.
Well, I saw her in a red dress, and I asked who she was.
We
and
were having some kind of a
One of the-
contest, and you
one
chose
of
me
the
for your
girls, one of
side.
the girls told me who she was, and then they did have a contest, and I did choose her to be on my team. And that was the big mistake that I made.
Yeah, me too.
Tell us what you looked like back then.
What I look like?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I was cute and little and
Cute and little, oh my.
pretty.
Yeah, she was well built and had good boobs on her,
Oh,
and that goes into the record. And that attracted my attention, and when she went down to
God.
the
That's
big
grandparents
program,
that these kids
they
do
had
have.
she had a swimming suit on, and I got a picture of that, and she looked all right in the swimming suit too.
Tell us what he looked like.
Oh, he wasn't half as heavy as he is now. Well, maybe a little more so because he's lost quite a bit of weight right now, but he wasn't fat.
Well, there's a picture in my bathing suit in that bunch of stuff you have too.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't look so bad, I can tell you.
Yeah, but you were heavier than fellas want to be nowadays.
I weighed 185 pounds.
That's not bad. Do you remember what you did on your first date?
I think that basketball dinner was our first date, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
I helped serve the team and everybody in the Sunday school class. We all helped.
And my sister loaned me the Hudson touring car. There's only 2 of them made in the world like it. And she loaned me that night, so I took Frances home in style that night.
And we went on hayrack rides and the class always had a nice formal dance, but 1 formal dance a year, dinner dance a year. And I remember I was having a good time dancing with everybody, and he disappeared. And I have a note that you wrote me too. You went downstairs in the lobby of the hotel and wrote a note that I was having such a good time you didn't want to interfere.
I was hot.
Oh,
I never liked to dance.
I believe that's that
I
on the
danced up there in that room, and the heat was terrible, and I just got out of
And
there.
I'll never forget the dress I had. It was a beautiful dress. It was kind of long and thin and flared at the bottom like they're wearing them now. And it was just over one shoulder, and that strap was, it was kind of a rust-colored dress, and there was a rust velvet roses with a strap over the shoulders.
Really was the reason for the whole thing, Steve. I was hot, and all these gals wanted me to dance with them.
Oh,
And I
didn't
didn't want
know
to
where
dance,
you'd
so
go. I didn't even know you'd
I just went
disappear.
downstairs, because usually after I refereed a basketball
And I
game or
used to
two,
love to dance.
I was
with
hot and I
you.
went down and took a shower. But to go in and dance around and perspire all in your clothes and smell like a pig and then keep on dancing
Oh,
and
you were
dancing.
jealous, as one should just admit.
What are you laughing about, Amy?
I believe her.
You weren't there. Your old grandpa wasn't any slouch in his young years, I can tell you that.
Oh, and I can tell you something else, kid. We went to a card party with his folks. They used to have big benefit card parties. I don't know who this was for, but this was the same hotel, and they had a big balcony around the dance floor, and that's where all the card tables and everything were set up. And I never will forget. They were calling out names to draw prizes, and I think Bob's dad, Buddy, as we called him, and my name were the only ones that weren't called. And he says, Francis, you know, if it were raining soup, I'd be caught with a fork, and I never will forget that.
Did you get along well with his parents?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But he never had much to say. Maudie'd get her dander up once in a while.
As a matter of fact, my dad only gave me a licking twice in my lifetime. But Mother used to whack me on the head, and she had a big wedding ring on, and every time she'd hit me on the head, leave a knot up there. Don't think it didn't. And we'd come in and duck under her. We didn't want it. But boy, she loved us, so I'll tell you that.
I don't think I ever got a spanking. I was such a nice little girl.
Yeah. Wonder where you lost all that.
Oh, living with you, honey.
I couldn't teach you that much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how long did you date before you were married then?
About a year.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a story about when you were married.
Well, he was going out of town, and he begged me to go with him and get married, and this is one thing I'll always regret, and I'll never know how he talked me into it, but I guess that was a salesman trip. Because my folks didn't have any objection to him. He called me up at work. I worked for Bruce Dodson Insurance Company, the only job I ever had in the legal department, and wanted me to meet him downtown.
Where?
Well, I met him in front of Emery Bird Fair.
No, ma'am. We met at the interurban station.
Honey, we went down there afterwards, but we went, because I went by
we
Emery
didn't go
Bird
on
Fair.
that train. We drove in the car.
That's right. And we went down to where was that we were married?
Liberty, Missouri.
Liberty, Missouri.
And the parlor
And we
of
down
the
to
Methodist
Shelter
Friends
Springs.
Minister.
And I think that was a big disappointment to my parents, because I was the only one and there wasn't any reason for it, just impulse.
What year were you married?
1930.
Mm-hmm.
March the 12th.
So you...
And it was a nice, like, spring day in March, and we got up in Illinois.
No.
Yes.
That's later.
No, that was the same trip. Now, see, his memory's failing him, and mine's
My
not.
memory isn't failing me,
And
because
no.
we called her mother on the phone, and then I got in trouble because my mother thought I should have called her, and asked Mimi to call my folks and tell them that we were in Excelsior Springs, Missouri,
I'm in Peoria right now,
and we
kid.
were married. You're not in Peoria either.
I am too, because
You just pay attention to me a minute. So I had to be back to work the next day, and so did you. Anyway, when we talked to Frances' mother, she said, "You're fooling. You're not married." And I said, "Yes, we are. Here's your daughter." And I listened, of course, on the phone, and she says, "Frances, you're not married. You can be married." you haven't got a nightgown. I said, she won't need that. But we both went back to work the next day because I worked for Neutrino Feed Mills and she worked for Bush Dodson, and we just had the afternoon off.
Oh my gosh.
But I was transferred up to Illinois, and she did come up to Ottawa, Illinois.
And it was still nice weather.
It was still nice weather. So we went in a two-story hotel, if you don't think my memory's good. And they had the windows open out. So we opened the windows out to the street. And lo and behold, we had to get up in the middle of the night. It was snowing.
Deep to a tall Indian.
And it snowed about 3 feet of snow. And you couldn't go. So
Bob was driving a company car.
I had a company car, of course, and I couldn't, there was no way I could get out and take Frances home, so finally I got her on a train and sent her back home.
Yeah, but my folks said I was going to travel a week with you, Bob, because they sent me my fur coat.
I know they
I
did.
bought a fur coat. One of the first things I did when I went to work.
So anyhow, to make a long story short, that's the week that I almost lost my life. And if it hadn't been for a truck driver, I probably would. That's why if you look in the Ford, or when I run the Chevrolet, you'll find fusees in there. And every year at 4th of July, I let the kids burn them. That's where I got my reputation.
Those, we never knew it.
But I started to go from Peoria. I had to go back to Peoria. The roads were open. And then I had to go back to Ottawa on a 2-carload purchase order of feed. I had to work a week and sell a half a carload of it. And if I sold a full carload, they'd buy a carload for a repeat order, see. And I was traveling with one of the men up there that carried a parrot, and he was a drunkard and chased the women. So the sales manager, Jack Ray, wanted me to, hey, look at those things come back. That's been years ago. He wanted me to go up there and travel with this fellow and get him straightened out. And I was supposed to meet him in Ottawa, Illinois.
Honey, that has nothing to do with your family.
Well, it almost did, because there wouldn't have been a family if I hadn't made it through that snowstorm. But anyway, the State Patrol, when they were standing out the edge of town when I started to leave, and I said, well, I'm going to Ottawa, Illinois, and I've got to be there because I have to meet a man there. He said, we recommend that you don't try it, sir. And I said, well, I have a shovel, and I have a tank full of gas, and it's going to take a half tank to go up there on it. I had a 29 Chevrolet coupe, and I got into this snowdrift, and the wind began to blow and snow like the devil. And I finally got my shovel and got out and shovel out of a snowdrift, and as fast as I threw out a shovel, the wind would blow it back in. Well, it was dusk then, it turned dark, and I could see this farmhouse, like if I parked it in front of the waterworks there, I could see your folks' house. And the snow was deep, I mean it was really deep. And it kept drifting and drifting and drifted up over the hood of the car. And then this trucker, I'd had tire trouble, and he stopped, and he had a dozen of these fusees, and I said, well, I'll just buy half a dozen of them from you. And he was glad to sell them because his company furnished them anyhow, and he probably bought beer with it or something. And I could see the light in this house, but when I honked the horn, you see the snow had drifted up in front of the car, and the horn wasn't making any noise to speak of, and the headlights wouldn't show. Tail lights would show a little bit. But I'd want to run my battery down, so I'd start the car up and let it run a little bit until it got warm in there, and I had a lap robe that I put over my legs and feet. And I kept watching this house, twisting my neck around like so, looking back at it. And finally, I could see a ray of light come out across the snow, and it dawned on me that these people had an outhouse, and somebody had gone to the toilet. so I watched as much as I could, and when I thought this fellow was coming out of the toilet, or woman, whatever it was, I struck one of these fusees and rolled my window down as far as I could, and the snow was only that far below the top of the window, and I waved it back and forth. And then when it got to burning down real close, I run the window glass up against the nail so it would burn all the way down. And I kept watching the house. So evidently they'd seen the light, but they didn't know what it was. So I lighted another one and waved it back and forth. And of course that red light carried across that snow just like a spotlight. So then whoever was in the house turned the lights on and off and on and off, and I waved the red light back and forth, and then lights go on and off and on and off. Then I knew they knew I was out there and couldn't get to them, or they couldn't get to me. So they called the Illinois Patrol. Their phones were still up, and they came out there and they broke one big rotor snowplow getting to me. And when they finally got to me, my feet were frozen, and I almost had to walk all over again. But I did have sense enough then when they took me into a hospital. And where do you think it was? Ottawa, Illinois. And they pulled this car of mine in because he couldn't start it then. It ran out of gas in the meantime. But that's how close I came to not being here.
That's the reason he always carries fusees.
That's the reason I have fusees in my car, and I wouldn't start on a trip any place without them. Another thing, too, if you have any trouble on the road, you can get out with a flashlight, red or green or whatever color you want, and the cars won't stop. They go by you. But when you light one of those red fusees and you stand out in front of that, in the middle of that road, they won't pass it. First of all, they can't see by it, it's so bright. And secondly, they figure there's been an accident or something and they can't go by. And they'll always
so
stop.
So before they start out, you ought to give them some fusees.
Well, I might do that too.
Well, Mama, when he was on that trip, where did you stay? Did you
Where
stay?
was what, honey?
When he was on that trip, where did you stay? At your parents' house?
So I was a traveler from the very beginning.
Then later on we rented apartments, not too many blocks. No, we rented a little bungalow first.
Little house up
folks.
to
And I was working and he was working, and we just had a coal furnace, so before winter came on, we moved into an apartment that was heated. And that wasn't too many blocks from my parents.
That's when we had Beverly, of course.
When you were in the apartment?
And then my brother Jim, he came over to see Francis and the baby one day, and I always kept the .22 automatic rifle in the bedroom loaded, but never a shell in the barrel. And he walked in there and picked that gun up and kicked the shell, not knowing what he was doing, into the barrel. And I had a habit of coming in and I'd take a bead from the back bedroom on something in the front bedroom, and she was sitting in the big chair that we have down the basement, that big chair right next to the safe, feeding Beverly. And there was a little dog in there that we'd won 10 cartons of cigarettes on a puff board.
Well,
And they
called it Lucky.
Francis called it Lucky. And the lamp was showing down on that, and I took a bead on that dog and squeezed that trigger, and when I did, that shell went off, and I blew that dog right off of that end table right next to Francis.
The reason I don't like guns.
And the funny part about it, instead of worrying about, and then I might have shot Francis or Beverly, I said, Francis, who had my gun? Did you touch my gun? No, she said, I didn't. I said, who was in here? Said, Jim. So I went to the phone, I called him, and I said, Jim, did you pick up my gun? He said, yes, I did. And I said, well, did you move the carriage on it? He said, yes, I did. Well, I said, you could have got my wife or my baby killed because you had to nose into something that was none of your business. That's why I locked things up in the case down there.
Yeah, but a person never should pull a trigger on a gun that's pointed toward anybody.
I didn't point it toward you. I
Well,
pointed
put
at the
away,
dog.
that's the same as that, man, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
They're really sure,
Oh,
I'll tell you.
boy.
Well, ask your question
Didn't
now.
tell
I'll
much
quit
about
talking.
childhood because you told all about your...
That's okay. Let's go back there now. What in school? What was your favorite or least favorite subject?
Subject?
Mm-hmm.
ROTC.
That was your favorite one. What did you like least about school?
Oh, I don't think I ever liked any, just like school. I was interested primarily in the ROTC. I liked bookkeeping, and I liked history because I think the teachers in that particular area were the most qualified, and there were subjects that I was interested in. I made good grades in those.
Where did you go to high school?
Northeast.
Is it still there?
Yes, as far as I know, if they haven't torn it
No,
down.
they're still
And
showing
Negroes
it.
and Italians moved in that area, and whatever's left, but it was Northeast High.
Now, Mama, you said you went to, was it Garrison Elementary School?
No, I went
Garfield?
to Garfield, but just
only for a
kindergarten,
while.
and then I went to Longfellow.
Why did you change? Why did you change school?
They moved.
Well, my mother wanted to move to a different area, and I guess so did my dad, and closer to his work, because we moved out on Gillum Road at that time in a duplex. And I went to Longfellow School, and I graduated from there. And then I went to Central High School, which at that time was the most qualified school in the city, they claimed. And my folks moved out that district in order to get me to go to school. The reason I knew so much about it, the girl that lived next door was president of the high school class out there, and was the only girl I think that ever was president of the class, maybe since now, later on. But anyway, that's one reason I wanted to go, and they wanted me to go there. And now, of course, it's all Negroes, too.
What did you like best in school?
Reading.
Mm-hmm.
I used to dance. I used to like to dance. Took dancing lessons.
What are some of your memorable experiences about when you were going to school? What stands out most in your mind when you think about school?
Well, I belonged to the High Y Club.
The what club?
The High Y.
It's
That was
Christian.
Young Men's Christian, YMCA.
Oh, I see.
And they had a fellow in charge of that. And they invited me to come over to the meetings 2 or 3 times. But I wouldn't go, because I heard they all would kneel around the table and pray, and I thought they were a bunch of sissies. And one day I was trying to get my lock open on my locker, and it wouldn't come open, and I kicked it and beat it and called it a couple of dirty names. And what's the fellow's name that died just...
Reese Peters?
No.
Well, I don't know, but it don't make any difference.
Anyway, he was a tremendous Christian leader, and he walked up to me.
Harry Harlan.
Harry Harlan, a great man. And Harry said, "You're Bob Monk, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am. What's it your business?" Well, he said, "I just want to meet you. I'm Harry Harlan over at the YMCA, the High Y Club." And I said, "Mr. Harlan, I'm not interested in your High Y Club." He said, "Anybody can kick a locker like that ought to be a part of our club." And I said, "Is that so? What makes you think that?" Well, he said, "You know Sam Thomas, the fullback on the football team?" And I said, "Yeah." "You think he's a sissy?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "You know Eli Wheat, the top man on the basketball team?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Do you think he's a sissy?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well," he said, "they both belong to the club. They like it. And he said, I think you'd like it too, because I don't think you're a sissy. You couldn't kick that locker that hard. He said, why don't you come over? And he said, I'll pay for your dinner. And I said, well, I'll think about it. So I went to the Highway Club, and I found out that they were just what they said they were. They were good, young Christian men. And they did get around the table, and they had their sentence prayers, as they said, every one of them. And they were leaders in that school. And I enjoyed that very, very much because, as I said, my lifetime had been spent. I went to the Methodist Church and was 13 years without missing a Sunday. Had a big long pin to verify it until something happened to that. But I enjoyed that, plus I enjoyed the military activity. And then they'd have activities. But as far as the girls in high school, I didn't have any time for them. I mean, it just didn't interest me at all. Except that they had a girl by the name of Kathleen Bull and a fellow by the name of Charlie Durham. And
They don't mean a thing to that, but that's the name of pouch
Bull
tobacco.
Durham was tobacco that they rolled their own cigarettes with. And this teacher happened to be a woman teacher too. And she said, Kathleen Bull and Charlie Durham. Oh, doesn't that make something? That's Bull Durham. And they used to have a picture of a great big bull on billboards all over town that said Bull Durham and roll your own. And she was a very attractive girl. But even so, I just never... And she was also in my bookkeeping class. But I never did anything to be real important in school. I made the operetta and also made the lead in the senior class play. But
Mother, where Johnny gets his ability.
Mother wanted me to sing, so I sang in the operetta. And they didn't even put the operetta in my graduation listing. They put the senior class play in there, leading the senior class play, and I wasn't even in it.
You got a little mixed up.
But Mother asked me to take the singing part. Captain of Plymouth. But they didn't have so much activities in our school, only the basketball games. We went to those. And we'd ride the streetcar downtown, 5 cents. And then ride it back for 5 cents. And of course I didn't have any income. And Dad couldn't afford to give me the money, so he did furnish me money to buy a wheelbarrow and a shovel. And I used to take ashes out of people's basements during the winter months and wheel them away to the dump for 10 cents a wheelbarrow, and I had to pay a nickel to dump them. But at least 2 wheelbarrows got me a ride downtown and back to the basketball game. And that was real interesting. But I never went to the football games. I didn't care about them. But, and I had no interest in tennis in those days. That was later on in my lifetime, after I was almost out of high school, I got interested in tennis. And I wielded a pretty fair racket for a guy that didn't practice too much, you know. Ernie Johnson beat me out for the city tournament championship, but he was just too good. I didn't have a good enough backhand, and he had an excellent one. And he had a good locker shot, and he put on my backhand every time, and I'd net the ball. And it was his sister that I had a couple of dates with. What's her name? Ruth somebody.
Well, honey, don't ask me. That was before my time.
Yeah, but you know her. She went up there to church. She's the one that had the dates with me. She had 2 dates with me.
Well, her must have been Ruth Johnson then.
Her name was Ruth Johnson then, right. But you know who she is.
I don't know the
She
woman.
went around with that old insurance man or whatever he did, government man, and looked after him and supposed to went on trips with him all over the country.
Difference anyway.
She knows who it is.
What about your school, Mama? What did you like?
Oh, I like frivolous things. I did belong to a girls' rifle team at Central, though. I don't think I could hit the broadside of a barn. But then I used to like to dance. I took dancing lessons, and 2 or 3 summers when I was just a little kid, I danced in a group that danced out at the park. And then later on, they revived the Priest of Palace here for a couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
The original was way before our time. And I danced in that a couple of times.
Now, what was it called?
Huh?
What was it called again?
Priest of Palace. It was like, sort of like when they had the Veiled Prophets in St. Louis. I think they still have them. It's a big parade, and they have a ball, and it's quite a, as far as the town was concerned, the ball was really for society. But they always had entertainment, and they had the girls in the dancing school who would be part of the dancing.
Did you ever get in trouble at school?
Huh?
Did you ever get in trouble at school?
The only thing I remember getting in trouble about was we were painting coffee cans and decorating them for Christmas presents. I spilled paint on my best friend's dress, and the teacher, she just scared the heck out of me. And I came home, and I was crying about it. And the girl was a neighbor of ours, so Mama went to see if I'd ruined the dress. And the girl's mother said, that was Katie Jordan, and I still know her. She said they had all the paint off of it before Katie ever got home. But the woman made me think I'd ruined her dress, and that's the worst thing I can think of.
How old are you then?
Oh, I'd say about 10, probably.
Did either of you used to bluff school, cut classes ever?